Okay, let's get started. So I just learned recently that there's no classes tomorrow, which means now this Tuesday night is the night classes before a holiday, which tends to reduce attendance. And since this is the first time we've done this, the state will probably be done more in the future, which means in the future Tuesday night classes will slowly disappear because people stop showing up. There's been a number of questions about the assignment. So let me address some of them. To start off with, in case you're not familiar with, Maven is another one of these build tools. And so this is Maven Repository, Maven Central, and you can look for various projects. And the interesting thing is when you go to a project and you look up a particular, in this case, Spark Core, and then you can look up a particular version of this library. And what it does, it gives you all these little snippets of code that are used by various build tools. Right? And so if you're using Maven and want to use Maven to download the dependencies you need for Spark Core 2.2, then here's what you'd add to your Maven file. And then there's SBT, and that shows you, right? And so when you start Googling around looking for how do I include this or that in SBT or Maven, and you go to Spark or you go to Stack Overflow and some guy says, here's a command, that's where it comes from. So once you know about the Maven repository, then you can skip the step of searching Stack Overflow and just go look at the source and say, oh, here's where they got the information. Okay, so that's one thing you should note. Another question that came up. So one student came to office hours and had beat their head against the wall for a day or two trying to get things to work on AWS. And their problem was, well, how do you specify where the files are going to come from? And the problem becomes when you run it locally, you don't have S3 running on your local machines, unless you have your own Linux machine that you've reconfigured to run S3, which, considering S3 is proprietary to Amazon, you probably would have to hack into their system to get it. Which means if you want to run it locally, you can't say my file is located in S3, right? And then when you run AWS, since that's the file system they use, you have to say, oh, by the way, now my files are in S3, right? And that means when you're writing this code to run Spark on AWS, you don't want to hard code the input paths and the output paths in your source code, right? Because if you do, then you have to edit your files one way to run locally, and then you have to edit again to run there, and you want to avoid that like a plague. You don't want to have to edit your source code before you deploy it, right? So that's just asking for trouble, because you will make some mistake and something will go wrong and you have no idea, and then you're back and forth because when you deploy something, your code you're deploying is slightly different than what you're doing on your test machine. There are enough problems deploying without creating more. So you do want to read your input files and your output files from the command line, right? And when you run it locally, you use Spark submit, right? And then you give the jar file, and then you can on that command line you can specify, here's my input file or files, here's my output files, whichever order, right? You specify, and that then you can give a regular path, right? When you run it on AWS, you want to say your input directories and output directories are in S3, and that's where you get this, right? S3 : / It's just a URL, a universal resource location. And S3 is just another way of specifying that I'm running on S3, right? So
the assignment said a model in a folder, a mushroom model, and fusion matrix in a folder, fusion matrix. Like I wrote it on the command line. I don't care where you put it, just write it on the command line. But like, is there like maybe a way a little bit by when set it or like give you like what my command line should look like, which I just titled the Amazon export like from the command line
right.
run. There's a lot more than just what I put in there. There's a whole bar for setting up the cluster and everything
right.
else. Are you gonna like dig through that and figure out how to use my command line art, or like give me a readme or something?
Give me a readme, yeah.
For the mushrooms dots, how do you want us to place it? Because we're off with our mushrooms applications. Like I have mine in input files folder. It's gonna be. I'm assuming like your nested buckets to read it in.
Well,
so do you want our arcs? Because right now my arc like dot load arcs plus mushrooms.
I want you to put the whole thing as the whole path as argument. Why? Because then I can just tell your program where I put it, right? My goal is to write a program that runs your program. Yeah, so when basically here's a complete path to where my input is, right? That way I can give, here is my version of that file, right? I don't plan it on. The problem with using your input file in S3 is I probably don't have read privileges, and then to try and get everyone to modify the S3 buckets to give me read privileges, I'm pretty confident that if we try to do that, a number of students wouldn't get it done right or done at the right time, and then I'd run it, and then I'd have to, oh, by the way, can you change permission? Yes, I'll just, my goal is to write a program to run it locally, right, and just, and then I can walk away and go have dinner while chunks through all this, and then come back and look at all the log files, say error, and then deal it from there. But now I have to remember all the other questions. I did tell people several times that when you run on Spark and AWS, any log statements you create disappear, right? So when you say, I want to log this, right? Or when you do a print statement, all those disappear too, right? Have you looked?
Yeah, I see all my.
I don't.
Oh,
All right.
you have to find this bucket.
Yeah, there's a whole like 10 of them, right?
I know that.
So I guess I just wasn't diligent enough looking through every single one of them, and there's it's not just like 10 of them, and then there's sub things inside each one, and you have
There's
to.
a whole bunch. Instead of log.
What's that?
It would just be log file.
Yeah, but how do you write them in the file? Right. But you do know how to write RDDs and data frames. So my understanding is you started your cluster up and you gave it a step, and that step failed, right? And now you're cloning that cluster to run it again. But why do you want to remove a failed step? It's already done, right?
Create a new cluster.
Yeah.
Do you care if that export has like two of them? The first one broke, the next one worked.
No.
It's like I don't want to run it.
Yeah, I know that. Look, how do I know that you ran your code on AWS? I mean, I can't tell by looking at your source code, right? Because I'm not going to log into your account. I don't have access to your account, right? I don't have access to your S3 buckets, right? So the whole point of asking you to give that command line is um, it's it's a very cheap and not very secure way of, giving some evidence that you did something in AWS, right? And that's it, right? And it's not very secure in a sense of, well, you just copy someone else's and you edit a little bit, right? Goal here is, look, deploying on a platform like this is not the same thing as just running a local machine, right? It's just not. Things happen. Things behave differently, and so you really have to do it, right? So if you're gonna come out of this class and say, like, I did some things on AWS, you have to have done it. You start learning things like, well, sometimes things don't work, and if I give the wrong path, things break, and it has to be an S3. How do I find the log files? How do I do these various things, right? Until you actually do it, um, there's all these problems that occur in real life that are just a bunch of details, which may not be interesting academically, but when you're trying to deploy something, they're awfully important to get things running. And so you want some experience doing it so that you have some idea what's going on. And let's see, you had some questions in the beginning of class? Now, how many people here are still waiting for their approval on their $100?
I'm not too worried about it.
Have you created that bucket? Is the path correct?
I have one issue, and I don't know if I just fat fingered something or something happened with word wrap or whatever. Because I had 3 command arguments. I would just space them, and then it was hard to see them apart. And I tried putting enter after all of them, and it takes care of that, and it works fine. You put enter in between each other, but you can see them more clearly and kind of like.
Yeah, make sure that it's S3:/ and your bucket name. Right.
So now when I create my plan, when I try to run, it just says complete for both these steps and these Sparkman application also. But when I go and check, when I go back to my history bucket and check where the output should come, it's not showing anything.
How are you writing the model, and how are you writing the my experience is when I've got a data frame and it's the write and save, and I give it the save as a text file.
No, I just tried like using two different things. So one is like I just use the instance of ML writable using this file for the save the mushroom model here, and then
Oh, yes, yes. Why are you hard coding the path? You have to give it the path to the bucket. And you're giving it just right? It has to be a path, S3 colon slash slash. Other questions? If you want to use a properties file to create the jar, what do you mean by using a properties file to create the jar? Um, so the question is, if I want to use a properties file to set parameters, that's going to have to go in your jar file, or you're going to have to put it in a bucket someplace and then read it from that bucket. You can also various properties you can put in the property file. You can also usually put in the command line. Any other questions? Should we move on? Okay, for the rest of the semester, what's left to do? I'm going to come back from break. I do want to talk a little more about Kafka, but there's not much more to talk about in the sense of we've pretty much covered most of the things overview. Writing a client, or writing a consumer or producer is pretty easy because there's like the API contains one method for each, read or write. And after that, it becomes a matter of configuring the various parameters that we want to use for Kafka. And then once we've done that, then the question is, there's a way of connecting Kafka streams up to Spark, and so Spark can read from them, and they're streaming and talk about the features that we have for streaming in Spark. And the big problem there is that now you got here's all my data, right? It's in one place. When you're streaming, it's continually coming in, right? So then you got that problem of you never have all the data. And so then we talk about having windows, or we're just going to compute things based on a window, and there's sliding windows. And so as we get more stuff, we can modify our model, etc. After we've done that, we actually have covered most of the material that I set out initially. I'm slowly tempted to talk about ACA, which is a agent-based system that some people use to trigger events, but I haven't decided. But the big thing is, once there's no longer an official assignment of projects, what happens is people's interest tends to wander because they're busy. And if I'm not talking about something about their project, then they're like, well, who cares? Right? I'm busy doing my project. So usually on project-based courses, the last week or two is more students working on projects and coming to me with problems. Which leads me to the main topic for the day, and that is projects. How many people have an idea of what they want the project to be? A few. So there are questions about projects.
I got it. The hard part, a very compelling project, ability to sense. A lot of times, like I email the website to have support. I ask them to just send me a and then
Right.
find a scraper, which I don't want to write. It's kind of it's just hard. You know, if every a project based on wall, I don't know if that set.
That is a problem, and scraping is no fun.
Yes. Let's show up in a data set because I'll be doing it on AWS.
Machine learning could be one thing. It could be looking at performance. What sort of scale do you get using Spark? Um, there's some people on this table and some people over there who have machines, and so I could say, let me just set up a Spark cluster and install Mesos and get it running, and so that could be a project. If you're, have tendencies towards sysadmin type stuff. Um, yeah, it should be related to the class. Um, any other questions? You should talk to me, and we do that for a couple of reasons. One reason is some people like, I'm going to write the greatest neural network on Spark that's ever existed, right? And like, no, you're not going to do that in the time remaining, right? Or some people say, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mushroom data, and instead of doing a forest, I'm going to do decision trees. Like, no, that's just tweaking one line of assignment. So one is scaling, and the other one is there's always students like, oh, I'm not sure what I'll do. I'll decide next week. And then next week comes and, oh, I'm not sure what I'll do. And then 3 days before the end of the semester, like, oh, I finally decided what my project's going to be. It's like, it is not a requirement to team up, but it's an option. The due date is when the final would have been in this course. And if I remember my schedule correctly, I think it's December 22nd. Yes, yes. But I don't do that. I have to wait until everyone's turned in the last assignment, because otherwise people then turn it in the wrong place, and then they hit the wrong button, and then I get these emails, and I did this. Okay, here's the deal with the projects and being late. I don't have much time to do grading afterwards. There is a hard deadline I have to turn in grades. So at some point I have to turn in grades. And so if you turn in after that, okay, there is no written final exam in this course. The project takes the place of that, right? As far as I'm concerned, you could take a vacation to India and submit your assignment, your project from there. I won't know, right? I mean,
Punch cards. Punch cards.
I challenge you to find a punch card machine.
So you're not saying no.
All you have to do is you have to find a punch card machine which you type in the punch cards, and you then have to find a punch card reader that I can then connect to my laptop.
I think USB-C, right?
I've used those machines and they do not come in USB-C. I do believe, I'm not sure if they still make them. They still fix them. They still fix them.
We still have this.
Yeah, right.
I feel like how hard would it be personally?
How hard would it be?
Anonymize.
Well, how hard would it be to get anonymized data from the university in a timely fashion? I think you would have problem with both the timely part and the getting part.
Interesting question.
Yeah, but you could probably just get the answer by talking to the programmer that wrote it. But yeah, they if you could show a good justification, you might be able to get it by summer, maybe. I do gather information about students as a graduate advisor to make it easier to advise, and I don't have access to their database. I just screen scrape. Right. Yeah. So now my original intent for today was for students to talk about what their project were, so I can understand what they're doing and say up or down. Um, do we want to do that today, or do we want to wait until after Thanksgiving? Right. Or wait until after Thanksgiving? So typically what I do then is have the students come up here and talk about the project.
Okay. I get
Okay. Let me first.
presentation.
I don't want a presentation.
I just have